Hello everyone, this is your friend Naruto Nexus 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. What if Minato fought the hidden stone from the inside? Part 3. Ever since I learned to speak fluently, I became very vocal around my birthday. The last thing I wanted was a repeat of my first, which saddled me with baggage that I had only just managed to shake. And that was ignoring Iwao's father, whose interest I'd attracted in a bad way. I hadn't caught any unwanted watchers, but they would have to be pretty bad at their job for someone like me to be able to notice them. All that was to say, I protested vehemently every time anyone, Akane Obasan, made mention of a party. And I could be very persuasive. So, like my last two, my fourth birthday was a quiet affair. Akane Obasan made one of my favorites, tonkatsu and plum sauce, and Kazuhiro was apparently in a position to ask for a day of leave. Our little family enjoyed the calm meal, and the house was quiet but for the occasional interruption of Akane Obasan's inane chatter. Over the years, she'd made peace with our comfortable silences, and took it upon herself to carry her own conversation. Sometimes it was annoying, but not today. I took a modicum of comfort in it, and I think Kazuhiro did too. As she settled into silence, I decided to speak up. I would like to enroll in the academy this coming semester. I'm ready. I hadn't mentioned the prospect until this very moment, and I certainly hadn't spoken of offer. My god brother didn't know about my weekly swimming sessions, as I didn't want him to know I'd gone behind his back and broke his trust. Oh, I think that's a wonderful idea. My wonderfully stupid aunt exclaimed. You've always been so far ahead of people your age, this might be a great way for you to bond and make friends. Of course, that was all she cared about. But since she was on my side, I didn't bother to point out that the difference in mental maturity between a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old was all that great. I don't know, Kaseki-chan, Kazuhiro said hesitantly. I have concerns. What concerns? I asked diplomatically. Well, physical development for one, he said, predictably. Everyone else in the academy will have up to 2 years of growth on you. Don't get me wrong, for your age, your conditioning is top-notch. And your taijutsu growth has been extremely impressive as well. But, as you know, it requires an even greater price for victory. I'm worried you could get seriously hurt. Quote, waiting an extra year won't help me out much in that department, I pointed out. And I don't think anyone I'll be sparring against in the academy will be able to pack nearly as much of a punch as you. Plus, the sensei won't allow it to go that far. Can't risk an injury that might impact me long term, remember? That's true, he admitted. But that doesn't change the fact that your constitution isn't as advanced as your peers will be. The exercises you'll be made to do were created with 5-year-olds in mind. I know that a year doesn't seem like that long, but for a child's early development, it might as well be a decade. I can do it, I insisted. I'll do whatever's asked of me, no matter what. Kazuhiro sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. That's what I'm afraid of. Imouto, your willpower is second to none. It's truly impressive, but it also scares me. I'm worried that your mind will push you farther than your body can handle. That was both incredibly insightful and right on the money. I could write a list of specific times I'd done just that, both in this life and the previous one. I understand, Ni-san, I said to butter him up. I know I have a problem with that. I'll try really hard to fix it. But I'd still really like to enter the academy early. It's just something that I feel like I have to do. Quote, he was silent for a long while, studying me like he often did. I wondered if he was seeing my father. All right, he finally settled on. If you say you're ready, you're ready. I trust you. I could have leapt in joy, if I wasn't so tired. Though it was my birthday, I hadn't taken the day off in training. Thank you, Ni-san. I chirped, and his solemn stare almost broke into something more cheerful. It's not solely up to me, though, he warned. To enroll into the academy early, you'll need a Jonin patron to sign an application form. I'm moderately close with a couple, but I'm not sure they'll be willing to sponsor you. You might need to prove yourself to them. Quote, nope. That's okay, Ni-san, I said hurriedly. You just get me the form, and I'll worry about the signature. He raised an eyebrow. And just how do you plan on doing that? I simply grinned. What? I thought you trusted me. I do, but Jonin aren't the type of people to fool around with, he said, gravely. Some have a sense of humor, and some really do not. Make sure your actions do not reflect poorly on yourself, or on me. These people could make or break our careers. I understand, I said more seriously. Consider this another test, if you want. If I can get a Jonin's signature, I should have no problem in the academy, right? Quote. He shook his head in bewilderment. You're the weirdest kid I've ever met, Imouto, he said, turning to Akane Obasan, who looked like she was about to cry in happiness at our sibling, nay, parental, bond. Have you ever met a 4-year-old who gives themselves tests? She gave a watery chuckle. I've never met anyone like Kaseki-chan in my whole life, 4 years old or 40. I stuck my nose up in the air. And don't you ever forget it. The moment I heard the voices of Genin reverberate through the tunnels, I immediately steeled myself and got into position. I hadn't swam at all in the half hour I'd been here, because being soaked would have ruined the image I wanted to project. Led the group as always, but as she entered the cavern itself and saw me, she paused. Because I was standing to greet her, and not on solid ground. My arms were crossed, and I didn't try to hide the smug grin on my face. Is that supposed to impress me? She asked in that same, bored tone. You said I couldn't do it by the time I turned 4, I replied. And I stand by that, she said. Before I could protest, she had drawn a shuriken, and tossed it underhand at my feet. The flat of the instrument slapped the surface of the water, and I yelped as the surface tension was broken, plunging me into the lake. I rose pissed off, using the stone ledge to pull myself up while shaking the water out of my hair like a wet dog. What was that for? I shouted. If you can't deal with disturbances in the water, and if you can't move, you can't claim to be able to water walk, she stated. Achieving stationary stability is the easy part, it's barely even step 1. Now, get me my shuriken. Those aren't to be wasted. I gaped at the audacity. Then why did you throw it at me? Because you were being annoying, she answered. Bragging can be useful, sometimes. But not if you can't back it up. Additionally, it was funny. Her eyes sharpened. Get it, or I won't sign your form. My grumbles were cut short as I dove deep into the dark water, searching for the shuriken by feel. The lake was quite deep, but this body's lung capacity had grown with all the time I spent down here. I wasn't forced to surface until I found the offending hunk of metal. Here, I muttered as I arose, finding that was already going through my bag. Privacy or consent, I guess, but there wasn't much in there. Just a change of clothes, a towel and the most important folder I possessed. She accepted the shuriken without even a thank you, and began to examine the text. Figures she wouldn't sign anything without reading it carefully first. Though apparently she was satisfied, because she filled out the bottom of the form without ceremony. I had examined the form myself earlier, and knew that I asked for the patron's name and shinobi ID number. Wordlessly, she offered the packet back to me, and I learned her name for the first time. Thank you, Endo-sensei, I said with a smirk. I told you not to call me sensei, brat, she said coolly. I haven't taught you anything. Quote, maybe not directly, I countered. But it was your motivation that led me to teach myself a whole lot of stuff. Plus, you gave me that hint about improving my taijutsu. I think I'll be able to stand up to any of my classmates now. Quote, she blinked at me. What hint? You know, I said with a frown. About how I can apply chakra exercises to compensate for my lack of size. She hummed. Ah, I didn't have anything in mind when I said that. I just pegged you as the gullible, overthinking type that would leave me alone as she spent the next week or 5 dissecting my words if I implied there was a message hidden within them. Figures you would have found some meaning there. Quote, I'm pretty sure my face was purple. You, Really? Why are you so angry? She asked, infuriatingly. You obviously gained something from it. That's not the point. I screeched, and everyone winced from the noise. Even me. You'll never be a good shinobi if you let your emotions take hold of you like this, she said, but I wasn't as gullible as she thought. You know what they say. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me, I can't get fooled again. You'll say whatever it takes to get me to shut up. I accused. I'm not going to take anything you say at face value anymore. Finally, the indifferent mask broke, and something almost resembling a smile crossed her face. Then maybe I did teach you something after all. Wannabe. Yoshiro had been an academy sensei ever since he had disabled himself in the middle of the Second War. There hadn't been any other option. He was part of an offensive in the land of grass, and had run afoul of an allied contingency of grass and leaf nin. He stayed back to hold them off as his peers finished the mission. His last resort, an A-rank fire jutsu that burned away his enemies along with his chakra coils, secured his team's success. Yoshiro hadn't expected to survive at all, so he readily accepted his retirement. For all of 24 hours. Then Lord Tsuchikage requested, as Yoshiro was a jonin and a veritable war hero, that he take a post at the academy. Though he hadn't wanted to, he agreed. That was 8 years ago, now. In that time, he had learned to take pride in his role of honing the skills of Iowa's future soldiers. Some would be destined to die as fodder, though who knows, maybe the peacetime would give them the opportunity to grow, but a small portion would become his peers. Jonin, the elite. A part of him enjoyed attempting to guess who those few would be. This current batch had several to keep an eye on. For instance, Katsuo and Katsumi, twins of the Kanjiki clan. They wouldn't be spewing lava for quite some time, but the elders of their clan never slacked off in disciplining the younger generation. Then there was Doi Hayato, a dark-haired kid with a sharp look in his eye. The Doi were a small clan, but their few members all made jonin if they survived long enough. They specialized in kenjutsu, which was a rarity in the Hidden Stone, and often worked as assassins. Another was Ashikaga Takeo. She wasn't from a clan, but her profession was redacted in her file, and Yoshiro was fairly confident he knew why. In a similar vein, Ishida Iwao was in this class. He was the son of Ishida Udai, one of the Red Ogre co-commanders. There was no way that man would let his son be anything less than exceptional. And, as always, there were the early enrollees. He had two this time, one being Ishimoto Eiji. His father was a jonin, so he didn't have to go very far to find a patron. Even Iwa wasn't devoid of nepotism. Perhaps he deserved this. Yoshiro wouldn't discount him just yet. Only time would tell. The other was a dark horse. Amika Saiki, and if her name hadn't captured his attention, her application and dossier certainly did. Both parents were retired jonin, just like he was. Slaughtered in the Fugataro incident, which was a catalyst for Iwa's aggression towards Konoha. The youngest Amai was only a month old, but had been found and recovered by an emergency team led by Tsuchibakori no Biwa. At the hospital, she was noted to have received few injuries at the time, though that would change over the years, aside from scarring to her vocal cords. Even then, she was noted to have an unnatural stoicism and pain tolerance, and a sensitivity to chakra. Quote, adopted by her teenage god brother, she would later be admitted to the hospital for a variety of injuries. Yoshiro was no medic, but even he could tell that all of them were training related. Yet her guardians insisted that they followed a reasonable program for her age. If they were to be believed, the girl was mostly self-taught, something corroborated by internal intelligence. Why the Shadow Organization was keeping tabs on her, he had no idea, but his curiosity was certainly piqued. What truly solidified his interest was her patron, Endo Ayumu. Yoshiro knew her well. She had been a member of the team he was a part of during his last stand. She was only a chunin at the time, but had earned a field promotion in the wake of that mission. From her actions and the capabilities he witnessed, Yoshiro was more than certain that she deserved it. If the kid impressed someone like Endo-san, there was something to her. Which was why he paid his old comrade a visit. Amai has the most raw potential I've ever seen in someone her age, she said bluntly, and Yoshiro had been taken aback by the surety in her tone. Her internal chakra control surpasses nearly anyone I've ever met, and that's no exaggeration. I only know two others capable of sustaining an open-ended technique as she did, and they're both far older. Little more than a party trick as it is now, but if she ever becomes capable of pure nature transformation. Quote. She let the statement sink in. Some ninjutsu required a built-in time limit to function, while others were open-ended, and could theoretically be sustained indefinitely. However, in practice, humans could only feed a technique for so long. The idea that a child surpassed most high-level shinobi in this area was impressive, even though its uses were niche. Additionally, I'm fairly certain she's figured out a way to manually increase her chakra reserves, and by a degree well surpassing what can be achieved through traditional means in such a short time frame. Her hospital records show she was admitted for a dysfunction in her kaiman, which had resulted in an overproduction of chakra, he offered, eyes narrowed. Interesting. Did they have to provide any treatment for it? She asked. He had memorized the dossier by habit, so he didn't need to search for the answer. No, the issue had resolved itself by the time she went to the hospital. She even declined chakra letting. Quote, that was no accident or stroke of luck, Endo-san said without hesitation. She induced that dysfunction in herself, and on purpose. I would stake an A- rank mission's pay on it. That would be rather significant. Increasing one's chakra reserves was ordinarily something that took years of hard work, blood, sweat and tears. That's not the only reason I decided to be her patron either, she stated. She has an unparalleled drive, and a level of focus that borders on obsession. She'll become one hell of a shinobi, so long as those same traits don't lead her into an early grave. The image presented by the girl before him didn't live up to Endo-san's accolades. She stood out only because of how small she was, and how she ignored the other kids chatting around her. She wore burgundy pants that slightly resembled those a real Iowa shinobi would wear, with a pouch at her hip. Her top was brown, which, to him, was a statement all on its own. Brown flak jackets were the hallmark of Iowa chunin and jonin, after all. It was sleeveless, revealing that both arms, from upper chest to fingertips, were wrapped in bandages. Not the kind that would denote an injury, but ones that were meant to act as padding and as a means to hide things. The sharp look in her eye hinted at the nature Endo-san had described. But he wouldn't take someone else's word for it, even if said person was a trusted comrade. He would treat her like everyone else, perhaps even more harshly. Attention, new Iwagakure shinobi, he called, and the children wisely shut up. I am the head instructor for your batch, batch 67, who you will refer to as Yoshiro-sensei. Though you may have teaching assistants and additional primary sensei for specialization classes, I will be responsible for the majority of your instruction, throughout the entire length of your time in the academy. If you are wise, you would do your damnedest to prove yourselves to me, as I will be administering all of your crucial exams. In other words, I will be personally responsible for your future. For those of you who were not told, he continued, satisfied by how the children were hanging onto his every word. You will spend a maximum of 13 semesters in the academy. Some will only need 12, but all are given the option to repeat a single semester at your own discretion. It might be in your best interest to repeat a semester if you feel you need more time and personal instruction to perfect a skill that is introduced. If you choose to do so, you will, of course, have to spend the rest of your schooling with another batch, and under another sensei. He was using a lot of big words, he knew. A good portion wouldn't understand some of what he was telling them. But this was Iwagakure. He wouldn't simplify anything, they would learn or be left in the dust. This should go without saying, but your final exam will be cumulative and extremely comprehensive, he announced. The results of that test will determine your future. The highest scoring of you will be assigned to a team with a Jonin sensei. The exact number will depend on the amount of Jonin willing and able to take you on at that time. The rest will be placed in the Genin Corps, though exceptions may be made at our discretion. His eyes swept over the assembled students. There are 32 of you in this batch, and unless some repeat a semester, 32 will take the final exam together. There will be no dropouts. As of now, Iwagakure has invested her time and resources in your development. You will repay her, for better or for worse. Yoshiro looked up to the sky. Your path to becoming shinobi begins here. But it doesn't end with graduation. Shinobi isn't a title that can be simply given by me, Lord Tsuchikage, or even the kami themselves. It is a creed, a nindo, an oath to protect your home and your people. Embody that, and you are a true shinobi, no matter what rank you wear. A shadow fell over the academy courtyard, and Yoshiro took several steps backward. That being said, you have another speaker. Quote, wannabe. The long-awaited day had finally arrived. The day I would join the Iwagakure Academy and legally become a ninja. Crazy, we would officially be recognized as such before we even learned a damn thing about the craft, but I supposed it was a logical extension to what Endo Sen's and Kazuhiro had tried to tell me. In the anime, the Konoha Academy was a joke, but I was pretty damn sure this would be different. It better be. I needed to get stronger, and quickly. The Third Shinobi World War hung over my head like a storm cloud. The building itself was somewhat intimidating. Unlike the Konoha Academy, which looked like a generic Florida community college, the Iowa Academy building was extremely traditional, and could have been plucked straight out of the Edo period in Japan. There were 3 large buildings, each one bearing a strong resemblance to Hirosaki Castle back on Earth, though unpainted and featuring a lot more stone than wood. All that could be observed from beyond the walls. Today, I would finally be treated to an inside look. Kazuhiro dropped me off at the front gate and bid me farewell. I guess this wouldn't be like it was my world, where parents would accompany their kids on the tour. I didn't voice any uncertainty or hesitation, just followed the crowd. In the midst of the buildings was a rocky courtyard, though I knew they used the park outside the complex's ornate walls for practices as well. There, I met Yoshiro Sensei, who might be the most important person in my life for the next 6 years. I found the schooling system to be fascinating, and extremely telling. It perfectly reflected Iowa's shinobi culture as well. Students would not grow at their own pace, they would either rise to the occasion or they wouldn't. It wasn't fair, and that was the point. The only allowance students would get was the right to hold themselves back, and that would have to be used tactically. It was kinda like the dilemma of consumables in video games. I confess to being a bit of a hoarder in this respect. I'd inevitably end up with a million temporary power-ups and health potions that I should have used a long time ago. I doubted I'd need to hold myself back a semester, but perhaps it would be a good move to at some point. Not to perfect material I was struggling with, that would be a waste. What I'm sure nearly all of my classmates didn't consider was that they could, at will, switch what class they were in. So, if they got along poorly with their teacher, who would be administering and grading their final exam, or if they didn't think they could score high enough in this batch, they could switch once. It was a double-edged sword, of course. A lack of bias and familiarity on the new sensei's behalf could work against the transferring student, or their new batch could be even more competitive. It would take a lot of research and preparation to use your holdback properly, which was no doubt the point. My contemplation abruptly cut off as Yoshiro Sensei's speech ended, with the promise of another speaker. I couldn't see said speaker, but I knew that they were already here from Yoshiro Sensei's body language. Genjutsu. Was this a test? I'd never been on the receiving end of one before, something I would have to remedy as soon as I could, but I thought that I of all people should be able to detect it in my canals. There was nothing, so either my vaunted internal chakra control was as useless as Kazuhiro implied, or there was something else that I was missing. Who would this special speaker be, I wonder? I still didn't have a very good grasp of the authority figures in Iwagakure, the only one I knew was God. I'm an idiot. I snapped to attention the way I had learned in military school. I stood as tall as I could in this body, and the quick motion created a small crack of noise. It garnered a few strange looks from the kids around me, who clearly didn't know what was going on, and I intended for Yoshiro-sensei to take notice as well. But I wasn't certain he had, because I kept my eyes fixed on the little black dot in the sky. What does it mean to be a shinobi of Iwagakure no Sato? A wizened voice called, and I couldn't keep my breath from hitching. The sound didn't come from above, it was as if the very earth itself had spoken. Many other kids had worse reactions than me. Some jumped or yelped in fright, and some subconsciously fell into a ready stance even though there was no discernible foe. Kamizuru Ishikawa, my mentor in the first Tsuchikage, taught me that an Iwagakure shinobi is steadfast. Our unity, our indomitable spirits, that is what makes Iwagakure the strongest hidden village in the elemental nations. That is what I mean, when I reference our will of stone. I barely had any time to comprehend his words when the courtyard began to tremble. That was the only warning we got before the ground beneath our feet erupted, and the courtyard, still in one piece, Mother rose into the sky. I didn't let the curse leave my lips, even though this was the last thing I expected to be part of my academy orientation. In mere moments, the entire courtyard had been lifted well above the roofs of the 3 academy buildings, which were themselves considerably taller than most structures in Iowa. Almost all of my classmates had been knocked off their feet, and I surely would have joined them if not for my chakra sticking. Still, I stubbornly remained at attention, even as I trembled involuntarily from shock. Finally, the ground lurched to a stop, and I barely weathered the abrupt end to our ascent. Out of the corner of my eye, I glanced around at my class, finding that, aside from Yoshiro-sensei, I was only one of 3 people in the courtyard still standing, the others being a kid wearing dark gray and wow. My old friend had grimaced upon realizing I had enrolled early and would be a part of his batch, but he made no comment and went about ignoring me. Respecting his wishes, I didn't make a spectacle out of it. But to say I was surprised to see him still standing at the end of that mess was an understatement. He looked different, and it was hard to articulate how. Perhaps it was in the way he carried himself. What happened after he severed ties with me? Now wasn't the time to think about that. The now slightly larger dot grew as it sank towards us. Others noticed and recognized it, and there was a mad scramble for everyone present to regain their footing before it touched down. To my batchmates' credit, most had shakily clambered to their feet by the time a small man touched down in front of Yoshiro-sensei. My first impression of Lord Onoki, the Sandaime Tsuchikage of Iwagakure no Sato, was that he was small. Taller than me at this age, of course, but I estimated he was only around 5'6", even though he was much younger than he had been in Shippuden. His nose was bulbous, but not as exaggerated as it was in the anime, and he was a hell of a lot more threatening. Even ignoring that little display, it was clear he wasn't taking the harmless grandpa approach the Sandaime Hokage had. No, this was a military leader, one whose strength wasn't merely a sum of his subordinates. I recognized the jutsu used from the anime. Doden. Chidokaku no Jutsu, Earth Style, Mobile Core Technique. I had seen it used only by the man before me. But he couldn't have done this all by himself. He must have had help, right? Right. He totally didn't. This man turned a meteor over half the size of Iowa weightless by himself. But why? Was this a test? Or did he want to assert his dominance, mythologizing himself in our minds while we were young, so we would subconsciously defer to him for the rest of our lives? I'm sure you have heard some variation of the expression, a mountain is only as strong as its base, he said as everyone tried to regain their bearings. I stand at the summit of the mountain that is Iwagakure no Sato. This is my view. Look over the edge and tell me what you see. A wave of unrest rolled over the group. Many were afraid to do as directed, I was among them, as I couldn't stand heights. But I pushed down that fear nonetheless, hoping the Tsuchikage wasn't a censor and couldn't tell that I was sticking myself to the stone bricks near the edge. What do you see? He asked rhetorically. Houses, shops. Yes, maybe the mountains that shelter us. There was a smattering of agreement. All of these are true. What else? Someone said. People. Yes, there are people, he confirmed. They look small from up here, don't they? But if we were to go back down, most of them would be bigger than you or I. At least he was self-aware. I supposed if I was one of the 5 officially recognized strongest shinobi alive, I wouldn't be self-conscious about my height either. When we look at the big picture, no one person seems all that significant, do they? If I were down there, you might think I was a regular old man. If you could see me at all, that is. But I know, and you know, that every piece, no matter how small they look, is vital to the growth of the whole. Even if its value eludes you from your current point of view. I was getting chills, and it wasn't from the strong breeze. So begins your life as a piece of the Iowa Shinobi forces. Know that your time in the academy will not be easy and it will not be simple, he warned. You will be honed into the strongest piece you can be. Some of your edges will crumble, such is the way of this life you've chosen. But what remains will be all the stronger for it. That is how you can demonstrate your will of stone, by persevering, by growing stronger even when it hurts. Forge yourselves into the strongest piece you can be, and you will be rewarded. Failure isn't punished, but failure to try will bear consequences. Not gonna lie, the threat, vague as it was, hit different when standing on a platform suspended 50 feet in the air. But I'm sure I have nothing to worry about from all of you, he said, once he was certain the message had sunk in. I can see the will of stone upon each of your faces. With that, the Tsuchikage formed some hand seals, and the ground lurched once more. Our descent was slower than our ascent, but I could still feel the lightness in my heart from the drop. Fewer people lost their footing this time, as they were ready for it, and we soon touched down inside the academy bounds once again. Good luck with your studies, he said, turning his back to us. I look forward to seeing what you will accomplish. Then, he took off back into the sky. Wannabe. Anne. This is my favorite chapter yet. I loved coming up with the Iowa Academy, it's very different from Konoha's system. Expulsion isn't a threat here, it's not even an option. Neither is dropping out. If you aren't cut out for it, you're sent to the Genin Corps, which is all but a dead-end job, possibly in the most literal sense of the phrase. I also quite enjoyed juxtaposing the Onoki and Hiruzen. Their words and actions reflect their values, and the values they wish to see in their subordinates. They are, in essence, the spirit of their reflected village. Iowa is harsh and stubborn, and Konoha is friendly and warm. Except Onoki is so much more transparent. Hiruzen frequently preaches one thing before turning around and, letting Danzo kidnap and brainwash kids, or encouraging the massacre of one of Konoha's founding clans. Onoki will unapologetically do terrible things, but he'll be more upfront with his actions. As far as Cage go, he's not one of my favorites, but I'm liking him more and more the longer I spend developing his character. But God, that speech was agonizing to write. There's a clip during the 5 Cage and Madara fight where Onoki has a flashback to the Shadaime teaching him about the will of stone. I watched it a million times, and still found it hard to articulate the message behind it. He essentially claims that Iowa Shinobi are all replaceable, though that word has a negative connotation he didn't really mean. To embody the will of stone, an Iowa Shinobi must seize any opportunity without hesitation to better the village as a whole, no matter the consequences. And that any Iowa Shinobi has the potential to be put in that position, regardless of background. Which was what led to the flashback. Onoki found himself in that position against Madara, and the will of stone pushed him to victory with debatable success. I tried to incorporate that into his speech, and I'm not sure I was entirely successful. Rare. Pre-chapter author's note from the future. There will be a lot of names thrown out in this chapter. I named each one of Kasaiki's classmates because characters who don't have names aren't people, and I.W. anted both you and Kasaiki to recognize them as such. It would be doing the story a disservice if I designated most of them as NPCs. However, to make things easier on you readers, I've bolded the names of everyone who will have importance to the story post-Academy. Even if that significance only comes, say, 60 or more chapters later, hint hint. Tilde x tilde. I stared at the border of the courtyard, still partially in shock from the Tsuchikage's ludicrous display. The tears in the earth rising beneath us were not seamless, and jagged ruts had been formed at the EDGES. I bet they would be gone before the day was up. Your home room is in Building 2, Yoshiro-sensei said, snapping us out of our reverie. Room 321. Be there in 15 minutes. Quote. He disappeared in a spray of dirt, and after a bit of confusion, my batch once again blazed into activity. Childish voices called out, asking questions to both Yoshiro-sensei who wasn't there and each other, because none of us knew which building was which. And as each one faced the courtyard, we could easily see that they weren't labeled either. Building 2, Building 2. There must have been some way for us to tell them apart, otherwise, he would have told us which one it was. They were all nearly identical, though the one directly in front of the Tsuchikage's palace was the tallest. I would hazard a guess to say that was Building 1, but I couldn't be sure. Then I saw them. On each of the roofs, barely visible from this perspective, were giant busts that acted as central spires. On the tallest building, which made the sculpture the least visible, was an elderly figure with a long, triangular beard and a mustache. The one ahead of us had a statue carved in the likeness of the man we had just met, but the last held a figure very different from the other two. This one was mostly featureless, as no hair or facial elements were visible. Instead, lines were carved into the stone to represent bandages, all orderly and precise. Hello, Lord Mew, I greeted the statue of who I assumed was the strongest of the Tsuchikage, though I had seen almost nothing of the Shadaime. Pretty sure he used the Kamizuru wasps instead of the dust release though. And, since the Sandaime wasn't a null man and presumably couldn't split himself, I was rather confident in my assumption. I wanted to be the first in the classroom, so I quickly and surreptitiously substituted myself with O. Nay of the stones the Sandaime had kicked up with his jutsu, landing near the side of what I was sure was the second building. The room was in the 300s, and since I was sure there weren't 100 rooms on each floor, I knew I needed to look on the third story. But which one? 321, I muttered. I had looked through the entranceway of Building 1, and it looked like there was a single hallway on that floor with long rooms on each side. Assuming that Building 2 had the same layout, my classroom would be on the opposite end of the building, on one of the sides. I was scared of heights, but that was overridden by my competitiveness. So, using chakra, I scaled the wall. Currently, I was incapable of vertical surface walking as it was demonstrated in the anime. Not just due to chakra ability, though that did play a role. Standing parallel to the ground was torture on the muscles, and it spoke to the pure physical potential of the shinobi in the anime that they could manage such a feat at all, much less for a possibly indefinite amount of time. I was an unusually muscular child, but I was still a child nonetheless, and my core couldn't handle such strain. But I could live out my fantasies of becoming Spider-Man by wall crawling. And, though 3 stories was higher than I had ever attempted before, I had little difficulty now, even with all of the artistic outcroppings that adorned the structure. Most of the windows I looked into were empty, which made me wonder why there were so many of them. But then I realized how the recently concluded war might contribute to empty classrooms. Shaking my head, I continued my search and nearly crowed in victory as I finally found Yoshiro-sensei standing at the front of an, as of yet, empty classroom. That would have taken away from my coolness factor, though, so I refrained. If this was my old world, the upper windows in a school would be locked. But in this one, they slid open with ease, and I climbed in to see Yoshiro-sensei looking at me with a single eyebrow raised. Amai-san, he deadpanned. Why are you entering my classroom through the window? So, he already knows my name. I'll go with the cool and mysterious approach. What kind of shinobi enters through the door? I asked stoically. A polite one, he retorted, and if my heart didn't begin to sink with that response, it did with his next question. Where are the rest of your classmates? A little flat-footed, I said, I assume they're on their way up now. Quote. His frown deepened ever so slightly. This was a puzzle meant for you to solve as a group. Sneaking up here by yourself is exactly the opposite of what I wanted you to do. Did you not hear Lord Tsuchikage's speech? We are all valuable pieces. Neglecting to help your comrades, especially when the inconvenience to yourself is so minor, will only ever come back to haunt you. What the I'm sorry, was I in Iowa right now, or Konoha? What the hell was this will of fire bullshit he was spouting? Don't get me wrong, I didn't disagree with anything he said, and in a more drastic situation I would have made very different choices. But this was so far from what I expected an Iowa nin's mentality to be. I'm sorry, sensei, I said immediately, and before I dipped my head into a bow. I misunderstood the purpose behind your test. It will not happen again. I believe you, he said. But you are in the academy now, and I am your mentor, not your family or friend. Any failure will beget consequences, that is how you will learn. What the? I was expecting to get praised for this, not punished. It was the first day, no, hour, for sake. I will accept whatever punishment you deem fit, I said, even though my ears burned. I will administer no punishment, he corrected, and my stomach turned. The punishment you will receive is simply the natural consequences of your actions. As if on cue, the door burst open, and a crowd of panting children burst into the room, headed by, Wow. Iwao just keeps surprising me, doesn't he? It was clear he had himself or had been chosen as a leader. A real white knight, and I had just painted myself as his dark counterpart. The villain of Batch 67. He froze upon seeing me, and as the rest pushed into the room, they seemed confused at the picture before them. Congratulations, Amai-san, Yoshiro-sensei drawled, loud enough for the rest of the class to hear. If this was a race, you would have won. Now, everybody take your seats. Wannabe. So began what I would have called in my previous life, syllabus day. We were taken between each classroom we would use, and met all the assistant teachers that would be instructing us. There, they shared the itinerary for the coming semester, along with their expectations for us as students. Since we were so young, everything was rather basic. The day began with arithmetic, which, if I wasn't a reincarnated adult that could already do it perfectly, would have pissed me off. I had been cursed to start with first period math all throughout high school, to my detriment, and it seemed to carry over to this life too. My next period was survival, something I knew considerably less about. We would be learning a lot of theory, and apparently a lot about knots, which my sailing prowess might give me a head start in. But there would also be a unit on foraging, and tents and stuff. Those classes would each be an hour and 15 minutes long. After that was physical conditioning, which was 2.5 hours, followed by lunch. That lasted an hour, and we were encouraged to make use of the showers during that time. Communal bathing, which was completely ordinary in this culture, was something I would have to get used to. After that was an interesting class, ominously titled Consequences. Yoshiro-sensei explained that its purpose was to put us through mental exercises that would force us to foretell cause and effect relationships. Basically, he would run us through what-if scenarios with varying levels of complexity, and we would attempt to speculate what ramifications they would have. Later, the scenarios would become open-ended, and we would be expected to come up with courses of action to take, and defend them against crit. IQ. It was an interesting premise for a class, and I could imagine how it would be helpful in the development of the shinobi mindset. That was an hour and 15 like the other theoretical classes. That was followed by a class that killed 2 birds with 1 stone. It was a written comprehension class, but the topics we were reading about would all be history related. And no doubt heavily edited and propagandized, though that was beside the point. Next was sparring. Pretty self-explanatory. We would fight each other, though that wasn't all. Each fight would be followed by an analysis that the entire class would take part in, which could potentially be very traumatizing for these kids. That took 2.5 hours, but if we finished early, like Yoshiro-sensei told us we almost always would, the remaining time would be added to the next and final class, which was calisthenics. We'd do full body strengthening, aerobics, flexibility training, and we would build habits geared towards increasing our body's overall health. After that, we would all limp back home. We wouldn't touch weapons or chakra this semester, and likely the next few semesters after that. That didn't surprise me. What did was that there were no martial arts classes, which didn't make sense to me, especially considering we would be sparring. If the sparring class wasn't used to refine our technique, what was the point? There had to be one. Otherwise, we would just be reinforcing our comfort with a personal fighting style that might conflict with the stone fist. I would ask that question another day, after Yoshiro-sensei hopefully forgot about the earlier incident. Before the man let us out early for the day, he had us do icebreakers. And not the surface level ones Kakashi made Team 7 do. Your batchmates will be your closest comrades, and not merely for the duration of the academy, Yoshiro-sensei said. Those of you who secure a Jonin-sensei will also be assigned teammates from this batch. Those of you who do not, will be grouped into squads composed primarily of your batchmates. Your survival could very well hinge on your relationships with one another. So, let us gain some familiarity. Begin with your names, he instructed. Then, tell us about your families, your skills, your weaknesses, the type of shinobi you want to be in the future. And finally, your home address. I will write down your responses, and they will be hung up in this room for the duration of the semester. I was already balking over the second, third and fourth point. But Yoshiro-sensei wanted me to give all of my classmates my home address. From the whispers around me, I could tell my classmates were as taken aback by the instruction as I was. We'll go alphabetically, Yoshiro-sensei said, not addressing the whispers. There were 26 students in my batch, so this might take a while. Starting with Asa Haifum, a plain-looking girl stepped forward. Her parents were shinobi, with her father being a jonin and mother a genin. She was good at trap making, as that was her father's specialty, but she had a hard time learning kanji. She wanted to follow in her father's footsteps and become a back-line defensive specialist. Next was Ashikaga Takeo, who was, despite her masculine name, a girl. She claimed her father was high-ranking in the military but wouldn't give a name, and since Yoshiro-sensei didn't press despite his stance on transparency, I believed her. I also assumed that meant her father was a jonin. Her mother was a civilian, however, and primarily took care of her. She was proficient in taijutsu and stealth, but was still unable to unlock her chakra. The fact that she mentioned it at all was telling. She also said she wanted to follow in her father's footsteps. Banryo was a scrappy-looking kid, obviously poorer. His parents were both genin, and he seemed very confident in his fighting ability, though I got the feeling that said confidence was unwarranted. He strongly gave off brawler vibes, and though he was substantially bigger than every other kid in this batch, he wouldn't be able to keep such a considerable size advantage forever. Especially when chakra was introduced as the great equalizer. After being prompted by Yoshiro-sensei, he grudgingly admitted he had trouble with reading and maths. He wanted to be a taijutsu specialist, which made me scoff internally. I had a great deal of respect for the art, but you had to be exceptional at it to constitute any sort of threat, especially in Iowa. Shinin Satoshi was next. He was clearly more sheltered, wore spectacles, and his clothes were conspicuously unfit for physical activity. He would need to fix all of that, but I didn't think Yoshiro-sensei would say anything, and instead allow him to learn the hard way. Maybe I would talk to him myself, and let him know that shinobi who needed corrective lenses always wore special goggles, which never fell off and were a lot more suitable for combat. He wanted to be a strategist, though it was clear he had no idea what that entailed. When he spoke, I learned that he was from a civilian family, and that he was a part of the first-generation shinobi outreach program, something the Tsuchikage's administration introduced in the wake of the last war. Businesses would get tax and utility breaks if the children of the families who owned them enlisted in the academy. Which also explained why the boy was so clearly out of his depth. He didn't know the first thing about being a shinobi. Though he did know how to read and write very well, and he was good with numbers and money. He also knew how to sew. Then came Doi Hayato, one of the few clan kids in this batch, who I had noted during the Tsuchikage's demonstration. His parents were both jonin, and were in the process of passing on their skills as swordsmen and stealth specialists onto their son. He said that he was so far proficient in both, but he said it like someone who was clearly understating his abilities. He had a difficult time coming up with a weakness, though he ironically settled on overthinking and indecisiveness. He'd be someone to watch out for. Go Yosuke was another civilian born, and he and Satoshi might as well have been the same person. He was a touch more clued into the shinobi lifestyle, and the two of them looked fairly different as well. Yosuke was blonde and wore no glasses. But his skills and weaknesses were the same. He wanted to be in shinobi administration. Hatanaka Sho followed, and he was shinobi born, with both parents being chunin. Apparently, they were also in the same academy batch, and if he wasn't a young child, I would have been suspicious about why he would have included that tidbit. He said his strengths were his endurance and physical conditioning, though he didn't use those words. His hands were bandaged like mine, though a lot more haphazardly, and I think that there were actual scrapes and bruises underneath them. He wanted to be a frontline fighter. Then came Higamari, a thuggish-looking girl with an ever-present scowl and short black hair. Her father was a jonin, her mother was a genin, and she also listed physical conditioning as her strengths and reading comprehension as her weakness. I was sensing a trend with shinobi-raised kids. She said her father didn't have a specialty, which was rare for a jonin, and that she wasn't sure if she wanted to specialize either. It was then that Yoshiro-sensei interjected, apparently deciding it fit to reveal something that would happen later on in our education. During your 6th semester at the academy, he revealed, you will be assigned a specialization, chosen by a committee composed of myself and several other masters who will have secretly evaluated you over the course of your schooling. We will come to a decision based on the personal attributes we see in you, your abilities, and the village's needs. Your wishes and your family's wishes will not be taken into account. Once that happens, you will take small group classes, in which you will receive personalized instruction and practice. CE. While I like the sound of that in general, I was not a fan of the, your wishes will not be taken into account, part. Something that was echoed by my classmates, in their expressions at least. They were too afraid of Yoshiro-sensei to vocalize their thoughts, however. I understand, sensei, Mari said. I have no issue with that. He nodded in appreciation and cued Hirose Daigo to introduce himself next. The boy had a jonin father and a genin mother, and physically didn't stand out in any aspect other than his eyes, which were acid green. Then he revealed what he wanted to specialize in. I'm proficient in genjutsu, he said blandly, and I all but balked at the wording. He was proficient. Not. He was learning. Most of these kids hadn't even unlocked their chakra yet, some didn't even know what it was. My weakness is auditory genjutsu, he continued. I wish to be a support-type shinobi. Do not practice your genjutsu on any of your fellow students, Yoshiro-sensei said sharply, and Daigo frowned. Mochiron, sensei, he replied. My father has been very stringent in disciplining me on the matter. Do not worry, I will not test myself in this setting. Satisfied, Yoshiro-sensei nodded and called my name. It seemed like it was my turn. While I had been half listening to my batchmates' introductions, I had been mostly distracted thinking about what I should say. How should I play this? I needed to offset my not great first impression somehow, so should I take a friendly approach to make people like me? That might have worked if Iwao wasn't a factor. I'd never be able to contend with him in terms of popularity, and I really didn't care to try. When his feelings towards me came out, no amount of smiles or laughs would protect me. My alternative would be a lot less mentally taxing on myself, theoretically. And it might be better for branding, later on. But holy was it annoying, and it would make me the biggest hypocrite to ever reincarnate in the elemental nations. Amika Saiki, Yoshiro sensei called, and I sighed as I stood up at my desk. Immediately, I could see my classmates perk up, eyeing me with poorly disguised interest. I was the biggest wildcard to them, conspicuously smaller, but I somehow arrived at the classroom before all of them. I hummed lowly. My name is Amika Saiki, I said. My parents were heroes, Jonin who were disabled in the war. Instead of retiring, they chose to act as a final defense against invaders, and were stationed in Fugator. Oh, a small town near the border of the land of grass. 1 month after I was born, they were murdered by Leaf Nin, who massacred the entire town. They set it ablaze, and the smoke scarred my lungs permanently. I was rescued, and survived against all odds to be raised by my god brother. He named me Kasaiki, because that is my destiny. To burn Konoha to the ground, just like they did to my home. To do that, I will become the strongest frontline ninja you will ever meet. Quote. I paused to let that sink in before continuing. My strengths, I am skilled with chakra work, and have learned the few ninjutsu people have been willing to teach me rapidly. My chakra reserves are quite large for my age, and my control is above average as well. Taijutsu, my technique is good, but I don't think I will have much talent in the art until I grow a little. I have no training in other shinobi disciplines, though I do possess some theoretical knowledge when it comes to biology and medicine. My greatest weakness is that I have the tendency to become extremely engrossed in my interests, to the point that I develop tunnel vision. I bowed my head. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu. What ninjutsu do you know, Amai-san? Yoshiro sensei asked, and if the circumstances were different, I would have clicked my tongue in annoyance. It offended my sensibilities to show all the cards in my hand, but I had already claimed to know multiple, despite only having 2. I flitted through hand seals for my Chisana Hikari no Jutsu, little light technique, which garnered some gasps. Then I flickered through the seals for the Kawarimi, and substituted myself with an empty chair in the back of the room. You know the replacement technique? Sensei asked rhetorically, his normal, mild frown still present. I couldn't fathom a guess as to what he thought of that revelation. Hi, Sensei, I answered anyway. So far, it seems ninjutsu comes naturally to me. I am eager to expand my repertoire. You should add impatience as a weakness of yours, he said cuttingly, and god damn it, this dude was really annoying me. Had he already decided I was on his shit list? Also, impatience. Excuse the you. I spent years of my past life underwater, months at a time at depths a native to this could not comprehend. Without Wi-Fi. And he had the gall to call me impatient. The accusation brought some far more recent memories to the forefront. My reckless pursuit of canal mapping. My obsession in finding a place to swim. But that was passion, excitement. Not impatience. Right. Ishida Iwao, he called next, and my old friend stood up, scowling at me. I schooled my expression into something neutral. I'm Ishida Iwao, he introduced. My father is one of the co-leaders of the Red Ogres. Quote. That got as much of a reaction as my demonstration, which was kind of bullshit but whatever. I understood. The Red Ogres were Iwa's equivalent to Konoha's Anbu, and the quasi-shadow organization was both romanticized and feared in equal measure. Having the son of one of its leaders in your academy class was kind of like finding out you were in a class with the kid of an oil baron back on Earth. What a dumbass. If I was Iwao, I would have taken that information to the grave. Everyone would be kissing his ass now, and by extension, making my life miserable. I want to follow in his footsteps. My strengths are my speed and my intelligence, he claimed. My weakness, Tu-san says I'm too passive sometimes. Quote, Yoshiro sensei nodded in acceptance. Ishii Masaru, he was another civilian born. Nothing special to note. Ishimoto Eiji, here was an interesting one. This little dude was an early enrollee, just like me. His father was a jonin, and I wondered if he was his patron. Eiji didn't volunteer that information, however. His strengths were taijutsu, and he had some knowledge of chakra as well. He didn't know ninjutsu like me, but he had unlocked it. There wasn't much interesting about Iwai Katashi, but he was followed by the introduction of the Kanjiki twins, Katsuo and Katsum. I was surprised to find that there was a clan of lava release users, as there were many practitioners in the anime from all over the elemental nations. Yoden seemed to manifest in a wide variety of ways. Kuretsuchi, the future Yondaime Tsuchikage, could do that cement thing. Terumi Mei, the future Mizukage, could wield traditional lava, and there was that guy in Kumo that had that rubber lava release technique. Didn't get that one at all, but whatever. The twins seemed impressive. They had my level of physical conditioning, but they were a year older, and I didn't fancy my chances in a spar with them. They hadn't unlocked their chakra yet, but Katsuo, the boy, felt it necessary to tell us why. Probably because he felt self-conscious from all the self-identified chakra users in the batch. He claimed their bloodline made lava release instinctual, and their natures tended to creep into any chakra they emit. So they kept their chakra locked as a precaution. Now that he mentioned it, I think I recalled hearing something to that effect in the anime. If it was true, I would emphatically support their self-restraint. Maki Amy was next, and I pitied her immediately. Not only was she a civilian as clueless as Satoshi, she was also a girl. Was very much a thing, as evidenced by the male-to-female ratio in this batch and the shinobi forces beyond. It could also be seen in the specializations of said kunoichi. The stereotypes in my last world were similar, though there were some differences as well. The biggest had to watch their backs, though. Iwa kunoichi were a lot less passive than civilized people were expected to be back on Earth, and many had the physical might and inclination to retaliate against assholes. I couldn't wait until someone tried that shit with me. Unfortunately, little Amy did not fall into that category. She stammered all throughout the introduction, and projected more unsurety and delicacy than Hinata. If she wanted to survive in this world, something big needed to change. Nagao Takeshi was another background character with a jonin father and a genin mother, making him the fourth person so far in that situation. Once or twice I wouldn't have blinked at, but for that made me suspicious. Men in positions of power marrying women of a much lower station, whose circles likely never touched, it left a bad taste in my mouth. Maybe it was nothing, and maybe there was a perfectly benign reason I couldn't see yet, but it was something I should look into when I was in a position to do something about it. There weren't any other interesting people in my class, and my brain was reaching its retaining information about new people limit. God, I wish I had observed. Osaki Ken was a kid of low-level shinobi. Oe Kyo was civilian-born. Tengen Nao, Uemura Nobu, Yusui Ichiro, Watanabe Misao were all the kids of low and mid-rank shinobi as well. Yamada Eiji might have promise, but he was lackluster compared to the other Eiji. And finally, came Yasui Shiori, who was only notable for her white hair and the fact that she was an orphan. I was surprised that she was the only one in that position, until I realized I had been born at the very tail end of the conflict, that the majority of the war orphans would be amongst earlier batches. Now that you are all acquainted, Yoshiro-sensei drawled, remember. From this very moment, you are comrades. Iwa is neighbored by enemy nations that would wish death and destruction upon us. The only ones we can trust are ourselves. We must stand united, or we will die alone. Together we stand, divided we fall. A common expression back in my original world, mixed with an undercurrent of xenophobia for flavor. The only ones we could trust are ourselves. Same shit, different world I guess. But what did I expect? This was Iwagakure no Sato. And, sorry for the info dump of names, I'm not too happy about it either. I had a strong temptation to go with the selfish, not caring about others motif for Kaseki, but I decided it didn't suit her character. Besides, it's important for later down the line. My goal is to develop all, or at least most, of her batch. As Yoshiro said, they'll be important pieces, even after graduation. God, it's exhausting, though. This chapter took me twice the amount of time to write as all the other ones so far. I suck at coming up with names, them being in Japanese only makes it harder. I believe picking generic names is a waste of opportunity, so most of them were chosen with a purpose. I invite you to look up their meanings, so all my work doesn't go to waste. Regarding what might seem like weakness on behalf of Yoshiro, Konoha's will of fire most notably pertains to teamwork, so it's easy to tie that ideal to Konoha exclusively. But Iwa's will of stone doesn't contradict its importance, its take on it is simply more impersonal. For Konoha, teamwork means growing a close personal attachment to your comrades, so you will fight with all your heart to protect them. For Iwa, teamwork is simply about efficiency. You don't have to get along, but when it comes down to it, you will work together seamlessly or you will die. It is the height of stupidity for any military structure, in the real world or in fantasy, not to emphasize teamwork. And interestingly enough, we have, in the Naruto world, an example of what happens when a military structure does just that. AKA, Kurigakure no Sato. Objectively the worst of the 5 great nations, until Mei takes over at least. Its shinobi hoard power, only driven to obtain it out of the fear that their own comrades might kill them on a whim, and likely face no punishment for doing so. They live in constant fear and distrust, fighting as individuals instead of as a cohesive unit. It's no wonder they have a special unit specifically tasked with eliminating missing nin. And the Bloodline Massacre was a big ol' oof, they literally eliminated a great deal of their military might out of paranoia. No way in hell would that happen in Iwa. Power is everything to them, collective power. The closest they come to doing this is by making the Jinchuriki outcasts, but honestly, that's kinda common sense, if they lack the knowledge about Biju that we're privy to. Their Fuinjutsu knowledge is basically in the Stone Age, and, as far as they know, their greatest enemies can turn them into weapons of mass destruction. To Iwa, the purpose of having Jinchuriki isn't to utilize their power, but to simply keep them out of the other nation's hands. That's my take, at least. Hope it clears things up. Tadaima, I called as I walked back into Akane Obasan's home. Kazuhiro had left a note on our rarely used dining room table, stating that he had been summoned for a mission, which was a bit worrisome. These days, he typically showed up at the administration wing of the Tsuchikage's palace at a scheduled time and was assigned a mission he hadn't been sent for in over a year. I tried not to dwell on it too much. I'm sure my god brother would be just fine. A sniffling sound around the corner distracted me, punctuated by sobs. Slightly alarmed, I rounded the corner to find Akane Obasan reclining on a chair, crying her eyes out. "Oh, Kaseki-chan," she said, startled at my appearance. "Is it that time already? How was your first day at the academy?" "It was fine," I said, frowning. To call the sight disconcerting would be an understatement. I had never seen Akane Obasan sad before. She was always bubbly and cheerful, nagging in an endearing way and painfully optimistic. I'd never seen her upset even once. "Good, that's good," she said, hiccuping slightly and furiously wiping away her tears with a handkerchief. "What's wrong, Oba-san?" I asked bluntly. "Oh, nothing's wrong, dear," she lied, and I put my hands on my hips. "Obviously something's wrong," I said. "Please tell me what." "You're a very sweet girl to worry about me, Kaseki-chan. But it's alright. It's just, today is Atsuchi-kun's birthday. I was hoping, see, he didn't visit last year either. And I haven't seen him between that time, and I just realized, I don't think I've seen my son in over 2 years. Quote, wow, what a piece of shit. Ingratitude was my biggest pet peeve, and maybe I was projecting due to my last brother, but I especially couldn't stand it when kids neglected their parents once they moved out. It was one thing if said parents were shitty and mistreated their kids, but Akane Obasan raised me. I'm sure her son received the same treatment as I did, perhaps even better. I'm sorry, Oba-san, I said, wrapping my arms around her side. You deserve better than that. Oh, it's not Atsuchi-kun's fault, she said, returning the hug nonetheless. Not really. He was born with a curse, one that you unfortunately share. A curse, I repeated. What curse? Yes. The curse of intelligence and capability, she said with a watery chuckle. You both see the world in ways that no one else can, and because of that, people begin to rely on you. That's what happened to Atsuchi. He mastered an art that most couldn't even begin to understand, and as a result, they've worked him to the bone. I'm very proud of him, and though I don't know exactly what he does, I'm sure he is doing this village a great service. But I do miss him so. Akane Obasan was clearly referring to Fuinjutsu, the art capable of sealing away the most destructive entities in this world. I understood why the powers that be might force him to work for 2 years straight, but I highly doubt they had clamped a literal ball and chained his leg, or that they locked him in some cell. He could leave, if only for a short time. This was an important moment for me, because I came to a decision. I was going to learn Fuinjutsu, it was too powerful of an art form to neglect. But I refused to end up like Atsuchi. I would be keeping a tight lid on my studies, and not breathe a word of it to anyone outside of my family. Yep. There was no way that decision could ever come back to bite me in the ass. Wannabe. Later, I passed a note to one of the administrative staff on the first floor of the Tsuchikage's palace. Despite its formidable exterior, the building's inside was rather bland. It reminded me of an office building back on Earth, with even fewer windows. Could you please deliver this to Hamamoto Atsuchi-san at your convenience? I asked, standing in my tiptoes to reach over the attendant's desk. Hamamoto-san, the worker asked, clearly amused by my struggle. He knew who the man was at least, thankfully. Yes please. It's a personal note. I assume I will not be allowed to deliver it myself. You assume correctly, he said, taking the envelope. I'll see what I can do, Chibi. We will have to screen it though, is that alright? Yes, that is no problem, I said. Arigato. The message was simple and mostly innocuous. Visit your mother. Wannabe. Kazuhiro hadn't known what to expect for this mission, but this was most definitely not it. His squad was large, made up of 3 chunin, including himself, and even more strangely, 3 jonin, none of whom he had ever met before. He worked with jonin occasionally, but since the war ended, never with more than 1 at a time. They were all at least twice as old as he was, and the type of humorless that he associated with people high up on the totem pole. There's a merchant, moderately wealthy, that would see the alliance between Kusa and Konoha restored, the most senior jonin, Nakamura Terua, announced. His suppliers are in the land of grass, but his wealthiest buyers are in the land of fire. Unfortunately, simply killing him is not an option, as he has a long line of succession. Even if we work through it, ending his family line, he has high enough demand for his wares to ensure the venture would be picked up again by another. Assassination, in this instance, would only delay the problem and make it more difficult to contain in the future. Targeting his buyers is also out of the question, another jonin, Maeda Satoshi added. Many are a part of the fire daimyo's court, and the difficulty in reaching them is disproportionate to the urgency of the mission. Additionally, we do not want to target the suppliers in grass either. If for some reason we fail to mask our intervention, we would lose all of our current amity with USA, and drive them back into Konoha's arms. This would be the worst case scenario. It would also be a shame, the third, Takeuchi Minoru proclaimed. As Aiwa can turn this situation to her favor. That will be our mission. We will infiltrate their supply line and replace their precious textiles with damaged and poor quality alternatives. Once the buyers unveil our additions, they will lose faith in the merchant and in his Kusa-based suppliers. They will accuse both parties of trying to pass inferior goods upon them, and business between the fire court and the land of grass will cease. Kusa will be desperate to find new buyers, and our merchants will swoop in, securing trade deals at a much lower than market rate. Quote, it was an extremely convoluted scenario. Luckily, Kazuhiro didn't have to question his superiors, because a temporary teammate did it for him. Pardon me, sirs, a man slightly older than him, who Kazuhiro believed was named Sho-san, asked. I have no background in such matters. Will the fire nobles truly sever ties with a valued merchant over something as simple as a bad shipment? Maeda-san snorted. He'll be lucky if that's all they do. These nobles, these people, live in a very different world than we do. They have put families to death for similar crimes. Which is why completing our objectives, though they may sound simple, will be no easy feat. The merchant, Oboro Tadachi, always personally inspects his merchandise before transport, and he always hires Leaf Shinobi as protection. Therefore, it is useless to make the switch before he is present, and at that point, there will be enemy shinobi present and on watch. Ah, Kazuhiro could see how that would complicate things. Obviously, we cannot kill the Konoha shinobi, Nakamura-san said. Doing so would launch an investigation, and it would be clear that we tampered with the goods. However, in a way, the shinobi presence works in our favor. If we are successful in our mission, foul play cannot be called after the fact. Konoha would never admit the fallibility of their shinobi to the fire nobles, not even to save a valued client's life. Quote, do we know the identities of their shinobi guards? Kazuhiro asked, because he thought that was a good question. Not yet, Takeuchi-san said. However, Oboro-san prefers a genin team, so he can procure a Jonin protector for a discounted price. Quote, well, they would have to fool a Jonin. Even most Jonin couldn't fool a Jonin. Having 3 on their side was barely a reassurance. Oboro-san is set to arrive in 3 days, Nakamura-san revealed. We'll make it there in 2, and spend the 3rd planning. We'll go over additional details on the way. Wannabe. I wasn't expecting to be challenged in the academy. Even in the physical department, I considered myself well above what I thought my peers were capable of. I was wrong. The academic classes put me in a false state of security. Survival was almost entirely new material, but it was all introductory and edited to be palatable for kids, and arithmetic was arithmetic. I could do it in my sleep. Then conditioning happened. I was solidly in the lower middle, though given my growth disadvantage I suppose that was to be expected. Everyone with shinobi parentage had begun their education early, with varying levels of success. I couldn't outclass the kids with a Jonin parent in any way, physically. On our first real day in the academy, Yoshiro-sensei ran us ragged, through a series of drills to gauge our baseline. There weren't weights to lift, which was good, because I knew that weightlifting at a young age could stunt growth, but we were made to do push-ups until failure, sit-ups, and laps around the park outside of the academy. He gave punishments in the form of extra workouts that encroached well into the lunch period directly afterwards to the 3 lowest scorers in each exercise, and the unlucky recipients too. RNED out to be, in order, Amy, Satoshi and Yosuke. Yes, only the 3 of them. They fell last in every event. It's a good thing they were so shit, because I was in legitimate danger of joining them after the push-up test. I could only perform 23 consecutively, which placed me 22nd in the class. I fared far better in the endurance test. We were tasked with keeping pace with a genin assistant, Kenshi-sensei, for as many laps as we could manage. Lagging behind too much would be considered a forfeit, and so would stopping, of course. I kept with him for a respectable 12 laps, each of which I estimated to be a bit longer than the standard track length. That meant I ran over 3 miles, basically a 5K, albeit at a very slow pace. That might sound impressive, especially for a 4-year-old, but don't forget, I was not in Kansas anymore. We all had chakra, and even if most of us couldn't actively use it, we still reaped benefits from its mere presence. Some kids lasted a lot longer, and among them was Iwao, who gave me a snide grin even as he collapsed a distance away from me in exhaustion. I ignored him, focusing on the Kanjiki twins, who were the only ones still keeping easy pace. The final handful of students dropped off, but it took an entire 4 additional laps for them to falter, even when Kenshi-sensei picked up the pace, which he hadn't done up to that point. He probably just wanted to move on. After an extensive cooldown, the majority of us were let go for lunch. I had a bento in my bag, but I ignored it, choosing instead to rush for the showers before anyone else did. I found them in the basement of the first building, and winced when I discovered that, while I had beaten the rest of my class here, there were 12 other classes, all with slightly different but mostly overlapping lunch periods. With carefully masked trepidation, I pushed open a door on the far end of the locker room, which I could hear talking and running water behind. It was the showers, as I thought, and they were almost entirely full. Not making eye contact, I quickly walked to the far, moderately less populated side of the room, my little soap caddy in hand. I pretended to ignore the lapses in conversation my arrival ushered and the whispers that rose to fill in the gaps, turning towards the showerhead on the wall as I mechanically went about my business. I thought 7th semester came in next. One whispered, "We should have more time to ourselves. She's so small though, maybe she's one of the sensei's kids." Oi, chibi. I sighed internally, and spared the speaker a glance. The girls I had walked in on were obviously many years my senior, probably close to graduation. This one in particular had dark hair, though I couldn't discern any more of its appearance as it was down and soaking wet. There was a smattering of oddly dark freckles around her nose and cheeks, and one of her incisors was a snaggle tooth that peeked through her lips even when they were closed. She looked almost shark-like, and not just because of that. It was the glint in her eye, and the pull of her smile. I could tell that this wasn't some nobody. She gave off antagonist energy. "Can I help you?" I asked with forced boredom, even though my heart began to race. I would get my ass kicked if I got into a fight here. I was hopelessly outnumbered, and I couldn't flee. They'd jump me before I could get my clothes on, and I'd frankly prefer that to being known as a streaker. "What batch are you in?" she asked bluntly. 67, I replied blandly. "Is that the newest one?" a bystander asked a friend. "How should I know? I don't keep count." "It is," I provided graciously, and the shark girl groaned. "Great. Does that mean we're going to have a bunch of brats coming in any second now?" "I don't think so," I said mildly, realizing I probably should have lied as soon as the words left my mouth. "I think most of them went to eat first," I finished belatedly, cursing myself. "I could be wrong, though." The shark girl hummed. "That's good, because they'd have to wait. We're not done yet." I grunted in acknowledgement, and turned back around in hopes that the conversation was over. But I couldn't be so lucky. "So why aren't you eating with them?" Shark girl asked. "They're noisy," I supplied. "And I don't particularly enjoy their company." She seemed to find that response funny. "Is that right? Or is it because they bully you? You look pretty shrimpy." "I'm small because I'm a year younger than most of them, and apparently humans grow a lot in that time," I retorted. "And I'd like to see them try to bully me." Quote, "Oh," the girl sneered, losing some of the humor in her voice. "What will you do? Set your daddy on them?" I had no idea what the she meant by that at first, but then I remembered that most early enrollees were spoiled brats who got their patrons by simply being born to them. "My parents are dead," I said in a bored tone. "I was given the chance to enroll early because I wanted to, and sought out a Jonin to be my patron." The girl arched an eyebrow. "You're telling me you impressed a Jonin?" Quote, "I'm here, aren't I?" I drawled. She snorted. "Prove it." I bent down to agitate the bar of soap I had brought and used the resulting suds to lather myself. Why should I? I don't care what you think of me, and I don't particularly want your approval either. Quote, how about this? The girl countered. If you prove it, we'll let you shower with us every day. If you refuse, or if you can't manage it, you'll just have to shower with your class. Come on, Hanabi, a girl tried to step in. She was blonde and had a round face. Stop tormenting the kid. Hanabi, like Hinata's little sister. What a cool name. And fitting. This one looked like a firecracker, that's for sure. Fine. I cut her off, to the rest of her class, surprise. If this is your allotted time, you're within your rights to kick me out. But I'd rather you didn't, so I'll play your game. What are the terms? Hanabi considered the question, mocking grin still wide. How about this? You try and get past me. If you can make it to the doorway, you win. Sounds good. I narrowed my eyes at the grinning girl, keeping my gaze above the neck. Should be easy enough, I replied, caustically. But your friends have to stay out of it. Naturally. I'm not just going to take your word for it, I claimed. We're ninja. Tell them they have to keep one hand on the wall at all times. If they let go, that will count as intervention, and I'll automatically win. Quote, that's fine with me, she said magnanimously. As long as forcing them to let go of the wall is also prohibited. Naturally, I parroted. A technical victory wasn't what I had in mind. Are you seriously challenging a kid in the shower, Ichikawa-san? A dark-haired girl asked. I'm just being an attentive senpai, Suzuki, she retorted. I can't let her get a big head just because she got in early. Look what happened to Aki. He's insufferable. Oi, don't talk about Aki-kun like that. Are we going to do this, or not? I asked. Oh, we're doing this, Hanabi said with dark promise. The challenge will continue until you either admit defeat, or it's time for us to leave. We have about 8 minutes until the next class comes in. I won't even need one, I proclaimed. Whatever you say, Chibi. Suzuki, count us off. There was a put-upon sigh. You're so annoying. Fine. 3, 2, 1, go. As soon as the rushed countdown concluded, Hanabi sank into a crouch, fingers bent into claws. Almost literally, because I noticed for the first time that the nails were sharpened. Without ceremony, I flipped through hand signs, lunging to the side as Hanabi's eyes widened. Wait, what the foo? Too late. I had already replaced myself with a shower caddy nearest to the door and delicately pressed my hand to the frame. The Kawarimi no Jutsu, replacement technique, wasn't without its drawbacks or restrictions. It didn't miraculously switch me with an object of my choosing. I was propelled the distance between myself and it, just as it was propelled in my own direction. And yes, there was an art to orienting your body so the object you were switching with didn't collide with you at breakneck speeds. It also meant that, if there were obstacles in between its caster and their target, like the bodies of Hanabi's classmates for example, the jutsu would fail spectacularly. Hurting both me and the person I ran into quite a bit. If they didn't block my chakra tether to begin with, you can't substitute with another living thing, I'm still not sure why yet. That was the reason I insisted the other girls stick to the wall, leaving me a clear avenue of escape. I win, I proclaimed to the dumbfounded audience. Now, let me finish my shower in peace. I was very conscious of the fact that I was in front of 8, underage by my standard strangers, and I was really trying my hardest not to look at anything. I would really like to face the wall again so I could stop feeling like Orochimaru. Did you just use a jutsu? Hanabi spluttered, impressively not having slipped despite her quick attempt to block me. Yep, I answered, avoiding looking at her as I retook my place and slid the caddy in the direction I pulled it from. How? With chakra and hand seals, same as everyone else. You know what I mean. How did you learn a jutsu at 4? I didn't learn the Kawarimi until a year ago. Sounds like a skill issue, I said, turning to lather my head with a bar of shampoo. I missed my liquid, chemically stuff back on Earth. It took a moment for my words to sink in, probably because that wasn't a phrase used here. But once they did, Hanabi's class erupted into laughter. Oh my Kami, Ichikawa-san, Suzuki gasped. It's like she's a mini you. Quote, I'm not a mini anyone, I said, at the exact same time as Hanabi loudly proclaimed, as if. I'm one of a kind, we said in unison. Then we looked at one another. Oh god, Kami damn it. The academy barely survived with just Hanabi-chan, and now there's another one. Another asked, gasping for breath. I'm ignoring all of you, I declared, speeding through the rest of my routine. As soon as my skin was properly rinsed, I switched the nozzle off and turned towards the exit. But before I got too far, a wet arm wrapped itself around my neck, and I barely resisted the urge to squeal. I like you, Chibi, Hanabi said, apparently over her mock outrage at the claim to our likeness. I'm Ichikawa Hanabi, but you can call me Senpai from now on. I will not, Ichikawa-san. Harsh, she said, though the dangerous smile didn't leave her face. You'll come around eventually. She lowered her voice to whisper in my ear. Soon, if you haven't already, you'll discover that there are two types of people in the academy. The ones who are here to learn to be good little shinobi, and those who are learning to be great. Who aren't here to get noticed, but to make themselves noticed. You know what I mean. Poor grammar aside, I knew exactly what she meant. There are those who are content to make a living, survive, and follow orders, and there are those who aspire to become infamous, live how they want, and give the orders, I said. I couldn't have said it better myself. I knew you'd get it, I could see it in your eyes. That second future you described. I will make that my own or die trying. What about you? Yoshiro observed his class as they formed a circle around the sparring ring, outlined by a stripe of white paint. He directed them to sit, and once they had quieted, he spoke. You have been assigned a number based on the alphabetical order of the class roster, he announced. I have 26 slips of paper with your numbers, and I will draw 2 names at random. These 2 people will fight, and afterwards, we will critique them. For the first 4 months of each semester, my assistants and I will guide these critiques, but after that, Otani-sensei, Sawamura-sensei and I will only speak up after all of you. For every comment we make, you will all lose a point out of your grade for the day. Though your fight, and not necessarily the outcome, will primarily dictate said grade. He and his 2 assistants would be positioned in a triangle around the ring, behind the students, for that very reason. Scanning the room, Yoshiro could see the nerves plainly visible on most of the children's faces. I had you sit in a ring so you can see from all perspectives. Some of you will catch mistakes that aren't visible from another angle. So make sure you pay attention, because others may not be able to pick up your slack. Once he was certain he had made his point, he continued. As referee, I will impose several restrictions. A ring out constitutes a loss. No ninjutsu or weapons of any kind are allowed. And when I say the match is over, it is over. Misconduct in this setting will be met with severe consequences. Are we clear? Hi, sensei, came the chorus, and he nodded. Good. Now, first will be, he picked 2 slips of paper out of the pile, number 15 and number 4. That would be, Kanjiki Katsuo and Chinen Satoshi. Take your places. The slips of paper were blank, of course. What? He was a shinobi, of course nothing would be left to chance. Each matchup had a purpose with varying degrees of importance. This one just so happened to be vital. Yes. The Kanjiki boy cheered. I'm first. Quote. The civilian boy was far less eager. He was shaking so hard he could barely make it to the ring. This seemed to disappoint Katsuo. Sensei, can I switch? He asked. I want a fun one. I'll preempt any such questions in the future, Yoshiro drawled. Once I call your names, there will be no swaps. You will fight your assigned opponent. If you are injured, sick, or have some valid reason not to fight, you will make me aware at the start of this period, or you will be granted no allowances. Quote. Katsuo gave a displeased sigh. Fine. I mean, yes, sensei. He faced the trembling Chinen, sinking into a ready stance that the terrified boy poorly tried to emulate. Try to make this fun for me, yeah. Quote. They seemed to wait for some cue to begin, but Yoshiro said nothing until it was clear they didn't know they could start. There are no countdowns in battle, Yoshiro proclaimed. The second you enter the ring, you yourselves are declaring the start of the match. Quote. Oh, great, Kanjiki said, and then he immediately blitzed towards Chinin, who immediately covered his face with his arms. Terrible. Most guards blocked a person's line of sight in some way, so it was important to make sure visibility was compromised as little as possible. Compensating with body orientation, situational awareness and sometimes other senses was a must. Covering your eyes completely should be the last thing one does. And for such a shoddy block as well. Kanjiki could have cleaved through it with ease, but he stamped his foot and circled into a hook key. CK instead. His heel easily swept aside the feeble guard, knocking off the kid's glasses in the process. Yoshiro was pretty sure that wasn't even on purpose. Taken completely by surprise, Chinin only avoided the following punch by falling on his ass. Desperately, he searched for his spectacles, and Kanjiki almost hesitated in his assault. But only for a moment. Just as he was about to boot the kid in the side, Yoshiro called the match. Take your seats, he instructed, and they did as directed. Chinin's head hung low, glasses clutched tightly in his hand, heedless of how they may smudge. Clearly, Kanjiki-san was the victor, he stated, earning some snickers. Can anyone tell me why? Because he's not a wimp. Banryo called, to some more laughs. Chinin's head sank even lower, and Yoshiro, eyes narrowed. First of all, raise your hand when you have an answer, he said. Second, rudeness towards your fellow students will not be tolerated. By the end of the academy, the deficiencies you notice now will be cut out, and you will all be true Iwa shinobi. If you cannot respect what your classmates are now, respect what they will become in the future. Am I understood? Hi, sensei. Teaching was only half of Yoshiro's job. The other was to foster camaraderie between the members of his class. He found it easiest to accomplish this objective by positioning himself as a villain that his students would have to work together to overcome. He was successful with his first batch, along with the most recently graduated batch he had stepped forward to instruct after the untimely death of their last sensei 2 years ago. He was praised for his effectiveness then, and he'd be damned if this one went any differently. Good, he said. Now, does anyone have a real answer? Kanjiki-san was faster, stronger, and trained better. Osaki-ken guessed. A more appropriate answer, but not as detailed as I expect it to be, Yoshiro said. During these reviews, do not bother discussing your classmates' conditioning or note any obvious physical advantages unless your analysis builds off such an observation. These spars test battle awareness, so that is what we will focus on. Anyone else? Then, their smallest student raised her hand, and he called on her. Chinin-san cut off his line of sight, she said. Even if he had the conditioning necessary to retaliate, this would have prevented him from reacting to Kanjiki-san's follow-up. Additionally, he was blinded further by the loss of his glasses. If he wore something more appropriate for our level of physical activity, that would not have happened. That is, specifically, where he went wrong in this fight. Quote, a good analysis, he allowed. He supposed that some of that intelligence Endo-san noticed was there, hidden underneath the ego. There were 11 other errors he had seen, but they were superfluous compared to the larger issues. Pointing them out would only serve to distract the boy. Normally, I would now ask what Chinin-san did right. However, there is nothing to speak of on that subject. He didn't say the words maliciously, but with professional detachment. Yoshiro wouldn't stand for bullying, but he wouldn't sugarcoat or coddle his students either. There were no participation awards in Iowa, and there wasn't a single thing Chinin did correctly during his match. Let's move on, he said, cutting off the class reactions. He took note of each jeering face, and mentally adjusted coming matchups accordingly. It seemed that there would be a lot of reality checks this session. Can someone tell me what Kanjiki-san did well? Several people raised their hands. It wasn't a particularly difficult question. He took advantage of Chinen-san's block and changed his angle of attack. Quote, he did display a degree of quick thinking, Yoshiro allowed as the boy preened. Now, what mistakes did he make? He could tell that the kids weren't expecting that question. Yamada Eiji raised his hand. Is that a trick question, sensei? No, Yoshiro lectured. He might have won, but there is no such thing as a perfect victory. There is always room for improvement. Did no one notice anything Kanjiki-san could have done differently? Quote, finally, a hand raised. Yes, Amai-san, he asked, impassively. He stomped his foot in his haste to switch attacks, she said. That might have allowed a more experienced fighter, if they for some reason allowed themselves to be put in Chinen-san's position, time to dodge or counter in some W. I'd like to see you try to change directions without making some noise, Katsuro muttered, ears red from the simple critique. But Yoshiro heard him. Kanjiki-san, Amai-san is doing you a great service by pointing out your mistakes, he said. Always remember, you learn more from failure than your victories. Besides, if she were to not speak up, you would be losing points out of your grade. His eyes slid to the little girl. Though he does raise an interesting point. What would you have done in Kanjiki-san's place? What would I have done in his place? Or, what would I have done if I was in Kanjiki-san's body at that moment? She clarified. Interesting. If you were in his body. Quote, I would have simply followed through with the initial punch, she said without hesitation. Chinen-san's guard was weak, and his arms were not braced in any way. They would have provided almost no obstacle. Additionally, he was at arm's length, but legs are longer. He was too close for a properly executed kick. The only reason his foot connected instead of his calf was that Chinen-san fell backward in shock. An experienced fighter would not have done that. They might have even ducked into the strike to rob it of even more power and place themselves in a better position to counter. So you think Kanjiki-san merely performed that maneuver as a means to show off, Yoshiro surmised. Kasaiki's eyes sharpened. Please don't put words in my mouth, sensei. I said nothing of the sort. Yoshiro hummed. You're right, I apologize. That was my own conjecture. He turned to Kanjiki, who looked about as red as the lava he'd one day spit. This ring is not for fooling around, he warned. Here, you will hone the techniques that might one day save your life, or allow another to end it. Treat this with the seriousness it deserves. Fear not, your classmates will learn your full potential sooner or later. He turned back to his pile of empty paper. Next is Ashikaga Takeo and Nagao Takeshi. Yoshiro knew Nagao Sr. He was well known as something of a misogynist, and such views were frequently passed from father to son. However, Yoshiro was in the position to nip that in the bud, so he would. Through the roster he worked, until he decided it was time for the pairing he was most curious about. Amai Kasaiki and Banryo, Yoshiro announced, eliciting an uproar of whispers. Yes, he arranged a fight between the biggest kid in his class and the smallest. Frankly, he had no idea who would win. Amai didn't seem to have much of a reaction to the announcement. She simply inclined her head and rose, stepping forward only to stop just outside of the ring. Unlike anyone else before her, she did some stretches before taking the final step. Come on, quit stalling. Ban barked. She ignored his jeers, and finished at her own pace, which Yoshiro allowed, since they were way ahead of schedule. It would be months before he would see fights of any significant length. Predictably, the moment Amai set a single toe inside of the ring, Ban charged, surging forward for an easy ring out. That was the issue with allowing an opponent to settle into a more advantageous position first, especially in this setting. Dodging wasn't an option. His arm span was much too wide for Amai to slip around. Yoshiro was sure they would be treated to an instant elimination, and he already had a speech about overthinking, overestimating and situational awareness at the tip of his tongue. But then, Amai sunk into a low stance, and readied herself into a strong cross block. It was almost laughable, that was, until Ban struck out with a right cross that should have taken her off her feet. And she held, not giving even a millimeter of ground. The only indications she was struggling at all were the sway of her upper body and the wince of pain that was quickly erased. No one was more shocked than Ban. What the? He cursed. And if this wasn't a shinobi academy, Yoshiro might have told him to watch his language. But it would have been hypocritical to tell a future killer not to swear, so he held his tongue. Ban struck out with his other hand, and Amai readjusted the elbow of her blocking hand to meet it. Though the angle of contact should have made Ban's fist slide off, it stuck fast. What the hell? He yelped. Let go of me. As he yanked with all his might, Amai released the chakra in her left foot, letting the large boy tug her forward a step. Caught off balance, but with both arms still stuck, Ban stumbled back, and in an instant, Amai released the chakra on her left forearm and right elbow as well. Her arm around his own floundering right, tugging it, and him by extension, forward. Simultaneously, she launched her already positioned elbow straight into Ban's gut with all the strength her shoulder and back muscles could muster. Ban was sent reeling to the ground as Amai released him with her chakra. As he wheezed for breath, Amai crouched and placed a knife hand at his neck to symbolize a kunai. Winner, Amai-san, Yoshiro intoned, and she skipped backwards to gain some distance from her discombobulated opponent in case he tried anything. She cheated, sensei, Ban spluttered as the class, shocked whispers echoed around them. He furiously wiped tears from his eyes, though Yoshiro wasn't sure if they were from embarrassment or the force of Amai's strike. She did something with my arms. Amai-san did not break any of my restrictions, Yoshiro said impassively. So she did not cheat. He might have banned ninjutsu, but he conspicuously didn't ban chakra altogether. Something Amai had obviously picked up on. From the previous day, he knew she had the ability to use chakra sticking, but to use it so effectively to defeat a much larger opponent. At her age, the first person to break Amai-san's hold during a fight will earn a reward, he announced, and the girl in question shot him a look of shock and betrayal. Of course, if you make a failed attempt, and that attempt leads to your defeat, it will still count against your grade. Now, he said, let's continue to the evaluation. Why did Ban-san lose? Few people understood what Amai did at all, and so, for them, answering that question was impossible. But after a moment, Hirose Daigo spoke up. He tried to overpower Amai-san with force. He didn't have intel on her abilities, and he underestimated her based on her appearance. He overcommitted to a single rush, and had no way to disengage once it failed. Additionally, he panicked, and assumed Amai-san wouldn't or couldn't let him go. Or perhaps he thought he could overpower her by pulling away. But the moment he shifted his weight, Amai-san capitalized, releasing him and allowing gravity and his own pulling force to unbalance him. An apt analysis, Yoshiro praised. Next, can anyone tell me what Ban-san did right? It took even longer for someone to answer, but eventually it was Amai herself that spoke up. He took advantage of the time it took for me to stretch, she noted. By rushing me before I could settle into a more advantageous position, he had very little distance to push me. In the future, I will make sure to stretch before I am called. That was all he had, as he didn't yet have the inclination to delve deeper into micro movements. Such analysis would come much later in their education. I suppose that leads into my next question, he said. About what mistakes Amai-san made. Did anyone notice anything else? No one did. He hadn't either, for this level of analysis. Good. We will move on to the next pairing then. Hatanaka Sho and Ishimoto Eiji. As the next fighters took their place, Yoshiro noticed Amai sidling up towards him. Can I help you, Amai-san? He asked. I apologize, sensei, but would it be possible for me to go to the hospital? I believe my ulna is cracked. Yoshiro sighed. Yes, you may. Do not dawdle. She thanked him and scampered off as Hatanaka and Ishimoto began their match. He would have to make her fight the last every day from here on out. He was certain this would be a frequent occurrence. A block was used to weather the force of a hit, while deflecting some of the concussive energy away from the body. But since Amai used chakra to keep the strikes from deflecting, she absorbed every bit of that energy. And currently, her bones weren't strong enough to bear it. He could forbid the technique, but it would be counterproductive. His students were here to learn how to fight for their lives, and such minor injuries could be mended in moments with Iryo ninjutsu. If she did anything that would lead to a more permanent injury down the line, he would put a stop to it then. She would probably be late to calisthenics a lot, but he wasn't worried about that either. Yoshiro could tell from a single look that she didn't need any guidance in that department. Wannabe. Every few days, after Akane Obasan went to bed, I would bust out the Fuinjutsu scrolls and attempt to teach myself the art. Every time, I would give up after around 30 minutes of research. Fuinjutsu was hard. It was hard, and stupid, and it didn't make sense at all. Or at least, the material I had to learn from was too convoluted for me to understand. It was like trying to read a physics textbook with a second grader's understanding of the subject. The few words present may as well have been written in Greek. A sealing matrix, the cool squiggly shape that formed the seal itself, was made out of kanji, but not normal kanji. Barely legible, heavily stylized kanji that looked different in every seal diagram I could find. Seriously, I had found the kanji for fire, one of the few I could consistently pick out regardless of font, written 12 different ways. I had vowed I would not try and actually make a seal, as they supposedly had the unfortunate tendency to explode if done incorrectly. If it didn't kill me, I'd at least have to explain what I was up to. That vow lasted approximately 2 weeks before my frustration won out. I wasn't getting anywhere by staring at texts of gibberish, so I tried to copy down the simplest matrix I could find, that I could tell was complete, in any case, since most of the examples in these scrolls were partials. Not one of my smartest moves, but it didn't matter. The stupid thing didn't work anyway. It was supposed to, when activated by chakra, crawl up the page before settling down a couple inches above its original resting place. The damn thing didn't even budge. What the is with you? I whispered, shouted. If it wasn't night time, and if Akane Obasan wasn't fast asleep upstairs, I might have thrown something. In a fit of rage, I crumpled up the paper I had painstakingly copied the matrix on. Was it incomplete after all? Maybe all the seals here were edited in some way for security. I had considered the possibility before, and now I almost hoped that was the case. Because the alternative was that there was some additional, unknown factor that I was missing, and that would suck. If that was the case, I would simply have no way of pursuing the art without asking someone for help. There were still some scrolls one hadn't searched through, though that number was dwindling. I tore through them, saved for the end simply because they were in the top corner, and, as such, were the most difficult to reach. Among them, I found something. Honestly, I really didn't know what. There was a diagram of a seal matrix. I had no idea what it did, as it lacked any explanation as to its purpose. There has to be an appendix somewhere. Atsuchi probably keeps it under lock and key, with explanations, but I didn't have it, so everything but the most basic diagrams are a complete mystery to me. I didn't know what this matrix did, and all I could tell was that it was much more complex than the crawling thing. What caught my eye was just a tiny segment of it near the top middle. I was able to identify some of the distorted kanji, but that wasn't what drew my attention. It was the shape, I guess, of the lines the kanji formed. I recognized it from somewhere, but for the life of me, I couldn't remember where. I uncrumpled the paper, tearing off a strip of non-incriminating white space. The rest I would soak in pulp just to be safe, but on this piece I drew the symbol. None of the kanji, just the shape. Then, I went to bed. Wannabe. With little fanfare, my first week of the academy ended. I was a little surprised to find I would have weekends off. They were so serious here, I thought ninja training would be a 24/7 thing. I was glad to be wrong. I mean, I would still be training, but the kiddos deserved a couple days off at least. Most of them. There was one that I thought needed a wake-up call, and, unluckily for her, I was too nice to watch and wait for her to learn it the hard way. I found the address I had copied down in the merchant's district, specifically in a tea store. As this was supposed to be someone's home, I assumed they lived in the second story. Ohio, Ojo-chan, a balding man greeted, and I resisted the urge to grimace. Is there anything I can help you with today? Yes. Is Maki Amy in? I asked. The man blinked at her. My daughter. Yes, she's organizing the back room. Are you a friend of hers? A classmate, I said brusquely. I was sent by the academy to ensure she has the proper supplies for school. You're one of her classmates? The older Maki asked, and I groaned internally. I showed promise, so I was allowed to enroll early, I explained for the millionth time. It was also the reason I was chosen to accompany Amy-san on this excursion. I was lying, of course. I was acting on my own initiative, because Satoshi, Yosuke and the other civilian-born had gotten their acts and wardrobes together by the third day of class. While little Amy was still wearing a skirt to sparring. Is there something wrong with her school supplies? He asked. She has some notebooks and pencils. That might be all that is important in a civilian school, but not the ninja academy, I said with forced patience. First, her wardrobe is not suitable for our classes, especially the more active ones. Which is why I am here to accompany her to get a new one. That will not be necessary, Ojo-chan. I believe Amy-chan will be just fine with what she's wearing. Quote, excuse me, and what has prompted you to reach that conclusion? I asked, feeling my blood pressure rise. Well, we just got her those outfits, he said sunnily. They look just fine, and we can't afford to buy her a whole separate set. Amy-chan will just have to make do. I found it very difficult to rein in my fury, and not just from the patronizing tone. That's funny, I said. I understand you've been given certain tax and utility cuts for enrolling Amy-san in the academy. Are you telling me you've already squandered all the money you earned from selling your daughter? That was why I had zero respect for the parents of any of the civilian-born kids in my class. They literally pimped out their kids to the government. I don't know about the others, but I was certain from this short interaction alone that Amy's parents hadn't so much as lightly researched the fate they were consigning their daughter. Selling. The man spluttered. You listen here, young lady, you have no right to speak to me like this. Where are your parents? My parents were shinobi who were killed in the last war, I said coldly. That is what it means to be a shinobi. To fight and bleed for your village. This is the fate you sold your daughter into. That was war. He protested. People die in war, but the war's over. Amy won't have to. Are you truly that naive? I exclaimed. The war is over. Who told you that? What treaties were signed? What declarations were made? I'll tell you. The Tsuchikage signed a temporary armistice. There was no loss or victory between the elemental nations, we just decided to stop actively fighting until we all have enough manpower. Weapons and money to start it up again. And Konoha is chomping at the bit to get revenge for Uzu. I give it a decade before the war is back on, and wouldn't you know it? That's just in time for your daughter to graduate from the academy. Quote, I hopped onto the front desk and got right in the slimy man's face. Know this, I growled. The little girl you called your daughter, the one you claim to love, is gone now. Her death was arranged the moment you enrolled her in the academy. Either she will remain how she is right now and die a literal death after a few missions, or she'll kill the soft, weak merchant's daughter she was born to be and survive as a shinobi killer. You no longer have a choice in the matter. Me coming here, that was a courtesy. If I go back to Yoshiro-sensei and tell him you refused to do what you're told, they'll take it to mean you are choosing to sabotage a future Iwagakure asset. And Iwa will not take kindly to that. Quote, worst part was, my words were true. If Amy returned from the weekend in a skirt, I bet my left hand that Yoshiro-sensei would begin to ask questions. Amy would be getting all the resources she needed, and I highly doubted that the expenses would be coming out of Iowa's treasury. 8,000 ryos should cover the cost of several outfits with change left over, I said coldly, as the man trembled before me. I felt a bit drained, for some reason. You'll probably have to do laundry frequently. Quote. Amy's father half turned before freezing as he saw the back room was open. Hello, Amy-san, I said coolly. Are you ready to go shopping? Why, yes, Amai-san, she stuttered as her father ducked around her, not meeting either of our eyes. Good. We'll make this quick. Wannabe. The following hour was awkward and spent almost entirely in silence. I showed Amy to a shinobi outfitter's, and though I tried to prod her, and encourage her to get something she liked, as long as it was appropriate, she was incredibly, and understandably, cagey. Eventually, I settled on a pair of gray shorts and a pastel red kinda blouse. Despite all of its features, metal weave for durability and protection, and a lot of hidden pockets which I thought were pretty nifty, it still gave elementary schoolgirl. Stylish and useful. She could afford 2 of the outfits with what her father had forked over. Do you think you'll need bandages, Amy-san? I asked, holding up a roll. Like what I use? I don't know, she whispered, not meeting my eyes. I'm not hurt. Will I be soon? This is so. I don't wear bandages because I'm injured, I explained to her, holding up the roll for her to see. These ones and the ones I use have metal wire woven into them. It provides some protection against blades. But that's not something you have to really worry about yet. I was just asking, I finished lamely. No thank you, then, Amai-san. I sighed. I can all but hear you thinking. It won't do you any good to hold it in. I'll listen, if you want. The hangers in her hands began to shake. Is it true? She whispered. What you said to Tu-san. I almost asked for clarification about what she specifically meant, but I suppose it didn't matter. I was gifted and burdened with knowledge of the future, so I knew that this so-called peace wouldn't last for much longer than a decade. Yeah, I said. All of it is true. I'm sorry, Amy-san. One day soon, the war will resume, and we'll be fighting on the front lines. Quote. She hunched up against the wall as fat tears began to fall in her new clothes. Amai-san, I'm scared, she said, her lips trembling. God damn it, I was not equipped for this. I never wanted to be a kunoichi. She blubbered. My parents said I'd just have to be one for 17 years after I graduate, and then I could retire to marry someone who could take over the tea shop. I could punch a wall, but I took a deep breath instead. The 17 years thing, that's technically true, I allowed. For now. But that number can change at the Tsuchikage's discretion. Last war, he upped it to 26, and it stands to reason he'd do the same again if he needs to. And in practice, I don't get the sense that people who are seeking to retire after the minimum amount of time really make it that long. There was a reason the Tsuchikage had felt secure in decreasing it at the war's end, despite his shinobi forces being at an all-time low. He didn't have many ninja left that would take him up on the offer of retiring early. The policy change was purely for show, to attract people like Amy. The sobbing only intensified. I'm sorry, I pushed on, because she needed to know this now. This wasn't Konoha. We didn't hide the realities of our profession for later, when they were already in too deep to back out. Not that Iowa gave you the option. But it's out of my control, your parents' control, and even Yoshiro-sensei's control, I told her bluntly, and she began to cry harder. You've been dealt a shitty hand. All you can do is try your best to make the most of it. All the scary things I said earlier, they're true. But there are good things about being a shinobi too. And maybe, if you find the right specialty, you can get out of fighting on the front line. You just have to prove yourself. As I said the words, the seed of a plan began to form in my mind. A plan that would be beneficial to both Amy and myself. Would you sit with me at lunch on Monday? She hiccuped, and my heart twisted. Associating yourself with me will only make your life harder, Amy-san, I said uncomfortably. Trust me. But I'll support you from afar, okay? Quote. It was the best I could offer. My life was destined for chaos, and the last thing Amy needed was to be dragged into it.